got a bad feeling from the moment that I heard the doorbell ring. Stylishly dressed young women like the one outside were a rare thing in my neighborhood, especially after dark. I opened the door just a crack and asked what she had wanted. With a too bright grin, the young woman asked if she was speaking to a former employee of Ravens Bend Correctional Center. I told her that she was, but I didn't budge. I had no intention of removing the door chain, not until I figured out who this stranger was and what she was after. As though sensing my suspicion, the young woman introduced herself as Chelsea Stowell. Her husband Mark had died while incarcerated at Ravens Bend, and now she was searching for more information about the place. The longer I looked at her smile, the more the tragedy underneath seemed to shine through. She must have had this same conversation dozens of times, and from the desperate look in her eyes, she had been turned down more often than not. I hoped she could hear the sympathy in my voice when I told her that, unfortunately, I was only a groundskeeper at Ravens Bend. I hardly ever went inside the facility, and I rarely interacted with the prisoners. Chelsea shook her head. She didn't care about any of that. She said only one thing that mattered. Did I still have my keys? I was surprised to remember that I did. After I had driven back home that bizarre morning, I had shoved them into a desk drawer without a second chance. Chelsea saw my nod before I could hide it. Her eyes lit up and she asked if she could step inside. She had an offer for me, she said, but it was something that had to be discussed in private. I should have known then what I was getting myself into. I looked around my street, deserted except for a few teenagers drinking on the hood of a broken-down truck. A couple houses over, I could hear Old Man Danforth screaming at one of his dogs. I didn't have any proof, but I suspected that he raised them for fighting. The sweat from my shift at the local pizza place was still damp on my back, and this was all my life had amounted to, probably all that it would ever be. What did I really have to lose by listening to Chelsea's story? I unchained the door and I gestured to the couch. Chelsea cleaned off a corner of it with a wet wipe and sat down. The uncomfortable silence deepened, and the makeup, the high-end clothes, the fake cheerfulness. It had all been a ploy to make it this far, but now that she finally had, she seemed unsure what to say. I thought that I was being helpful when I had asked what her husband had been in for. A fraud, embezzlement. Chelsea blushed, angry that I had made her say it. But that had nothing to do with the sort of man that Mark was. He was funny, considerate, and he loved his family. But after the trial, it was like the word criminal had been branded into his forehead. He died in that place, without ever having a chance to clear his name, to see who he could have become. I told her that I was sorry and that I meant it, but I didn't see how I could help. I want to stand where he stood, in the place where he... Chelsea trailed off. She wiped her nose with a handkerchief. There were already tears forming in the corners of her eyes. As gently as I could, I explained that what she was proposing was a serious crime. Besides, there was no telling what security measures had been set up around Ravens Bend during the past years, or how much the structure had deteriorated. It's not breaking and entering if you've got the keys, Chelsea retorted. And you know as well as I do that nobody's watching the place. I shook my head. What she was proposing was insane. $70,000, Chelsea whispered. That's how much I'll pay you to get me into Ravens Bend. I began to say no for a second time, but then I hesitated. That was life-changing money. It was a down payment on a car or a house, a chance to finally get out of this shoddy little town that had let me down so often. I was about to ask Chelsea where she had gotten such a sum, but she beat me to it.
Were you men?
That's all that I have left of Mark's dirty money. As crazy as it sounds, I want to get rid of it, to start over clean. And to do that, I have to say goodbye. I asked Chelsea once again if she was sure about this. A smile crept across her face beneath the tears. She knew that she had won. After she left, I did a little digging of my own. I discovered that Mark Stowell had been a real estate developer who had made a fortune cutting corners and making impossible promises, and barely any of it was recovered after his arrest. I also learned that Mark hadn't been the only one to die at Ravens Bend Correctional Center. 3 inmates had been stabbed to death during a gang riot the year after the place had opened, and another was found hanging in the laundry room under mysterious circumstances. There was a guard as well, Officer Thaddeus Williams, who was felled by an aneurysm while on duty. Curiously enough, Officer Williams' death had come just 3 days before the complex was closed down. None of it seemed particularly out of the ordinary. In fact, out of all the deaths at Ravens Bend, Chelsea's husband's was the only one that stood out, specifically because of the lack of details. Only 2 brief articles had been written about his passing, and neither mentioned how he had died. One was accompanied by a black and white photo of the grieving widow, which proved at least that Chelsea was who she said she was. And when we met that Sunday to make our preparations, I caught myself watching Chelsea out of the corner of my eye. I began to understand what Mark must have seen in her. There was something endearing about her hard-edged features, about the way her eyes seemed to narrow when she was really focused on something. The gear that she had brought, however, left it clear that she was no trophy wife. Gloves, masks, rope, bolt cutters, and crowbars. The loadout that she had brought made it feel like we were breaking into the Louvre, rather than some vacant Midwestern prison that no one cared about. The amount of planning she had put into the whole thing gave me confidence, but the cold metal of the key ring in my hand took it away. I couldn't stop thinking about that bizarre morning when I, and presumably every other employee of Ravens Bend, had been informed that we were out of a job. In spite of the security risk, we had all been sent home with our keys, badges, and work uniforms, and no one working inside had ever come forward about why the place had closed down. What had really happened behind those double-layered steel gates? The more I pondered those questions, the more troubled I felt. And by the time that Chelsea arrived to pick me up, my nerves were a mess. She, on the other hand, was cold as ice. The look in her eyes reminded me of an Olympic athlete who had spent years training for a single moment and was now coolly certain of success. The key ring jangled in my pocket like an omen as I climbed into her passenger seat, and we didn't talk. So late at night, the small town roads were nearly deserted. Only once did I spot a dark, gaunt shape, a deer maybe, slinking back into the undergrowth. There was nothing but fields and forest around the Ravens Bend complex, so we parked at the nearest possible place, a shuttered general store a few miles away. After driving around back to hide our vehicles from the road, Chelsea killed the engine, slung her pack over her shoulder, and trampled off through the long grass. She didn't look back to see if I was following. We skirted the edge of the woods, ready to take cover if any headlights approached. But none did. Chelsea set such a rapid pace that I had to practically jog to keep up with her, stumbling in gopher holes and over the branches of fallen trees. Even so, almost an hour passed before the massive black hulk of the Ravens Bend Correctional Center rose up before us. From Chelsea's grimace and the way that she kept checking her digital watch, I could tell that she was thinking the same thing that I was. We were way behind schedule.